Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for our Facebook Live. My name is Gabby, joined here with two very special guests, and we are going to be discussing how classroom acoustics affect learning. Now, before we go into some of our discussion questions, I'm going to have our guests introduce themselves. Mary, would you like to begin?
Sure. My name is Meredith Spratford. I'm a senior research audiologist at Boys Town National Research Hospital, and I currently work in the Audibility, Perception, and Cognition Laboratory.
And I'm James Cottrell. I'm a local acoustician here in Omaha, Nebraska, working for NV5.
Wonderful. Well, it's great to have both of you on here to share your expertise on this topic. And before we answer those questions I mentioned, tell us more about this topic. What is classroom acoustics and why are we talking about it? Why should parents and our followers tune into this topic today?
Sure. I'll go ahead and take that one. So classroom acoustics, when we think about that, we're really characterizing the amount of noise in a classroom and the amount of reverberation or echoes in the classroom and how that impacts listening and learning for students. And we should really all care about acoustics because they influence a lot of our everyday lives, even outside of the classroom. So everywhere we go, there is sound. That sound can be helpful, like a warning or an alarm or someone talking to you, or it could also be harmful if sound is at dangerous levels or so loud that it covers up important information that we need to know. So today, James and I will be giving you information to better understand how, if you're a student or if you're a parent, how your student or your child's exposure to noise and reverberation in the classroom can impact their academic success. And if you're an administrator or teacher or service provider in the schools, we'll give you information that you can use to help make accommodations in the classroom to improve the students' access to what is being taught.
Yeah, and clearly I know this is something you both are very passionate and, educated on. So, Mary, will you tell me more about the Audibility, Perception, and Cognition Laboratory at Boys Town National Research Hospital? What kind of research do you guys do, and how does it relate to this topic today?
Sure. So the research that we do, we'll just break down our name, focuses on audibility. So how well children are able to hear elements of speech. The second word is perception. So how well children are able to understand and make sense of what they hear. And then also cognition. So we're looking at how other skills like attention and focus can support children's hearing and understanding. And we really want to make it easier for clinicians to make decisions about when kids could benefit from amplification and actually make that amplification better. Our lab has done quite a bit of classroom measurements, of acoustic measurements in classrooms, and that we'll share about today.
Yeah, that's great. So, for the average person who doesn't know a lot about this, like myself, how noisy are classrooms and why are they so noisy?
Sure. Well, I'll go off of the measurements that we took in over 100 general education classrooms here in elementary schools. On average, the occupied classroom, so when students were in the classroom doing quiet desk work, the sound level was about 50 dB. And usually when someone is talking to you from about a meter away, it's about 65 decibels, and a whisper is about 30 decibels. So it's kind of a quiet speech level, I would say. So around 50 decibels, again, during that quiet activity or desk work. But we've seen other research showing us that the level of noise varies really rapidly throughout the day. So it's not often that kids are sitting quietly at their desks all day long. The noise can vary from 40 decibels to 90 decibels, depending on the activity and the age of the children in the classroom. And if we think about different types of classrooms, the biggest source of noise or activity in the classroom is the children themselves. The noisiest classrooms tend to be the ones that have the younger children in them, so preschools, and then elementary schools, and then things tend to quiet down a little bit in middle and high school. And they're noisy. Kids are noisy. Kids don't know that when the room gets loud, they have other strategies to use to to kind of help people understand. Instead of using other strategies, the kids just make their own voices louder and louder and louder as the classroom gets noisier. And when you add in a lot of hard surfaces in classrooms, so that they're easy to clean, that adds reverberation, and all of those echoes of the speech adding up, they add up together to make it even noisier.
Yeah. And I forgot to mention too at the beginning, if you are watching live and you have a question for James or Mary as we are going through our discussion questions, if it sparks anything, go ahead and leave it in the comment section of this video, and we will make sure to save time for a little Q&A at the end.
Yeah.
And make sure that you give it a thumbs up. I see we've got people on, so thumbs up this video.
One other source of noise, besides the children, if we're thinking of outside the classroom,
Yeah.
um, any we've got the groundskeepers mowing the lawn outside. We've got kids at recess outside. And also inside the classroom, the kids aren't the only noise source. We also have heating and ventilation and air conditioning systems running all the time, pretty much. We have desks and chairs scraping around on the floors. We have papers shuffling. So there's a lot of different sources of noise. Some can be ongoing and pretty loud or quiet, and then some could be just that happen really rapidly, once during a class period, for example, a locker slamming.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many, other little sounds that I think maybe we tune out. And when we think of, oh, how noisy is a classroom actually? Like my first thought goes to the teacher talking, the students talking. But you take that and you layer it with all those other things you just mentioned, and that leads me right into my next question is, what impact do these sounds and these acoustics within the classroom have on students academically throughout the day?
Right. Well, it's kind of a downstream effect. So if we start in that excessive noise and reverberation can really decrease how a student hears and understands what the teacher or their fellow students are saying. They might have trouble learning new words and concepts in background noise. They will have difficulty remembering what they've been told or what they have learned that day. They may even have trouble socializing. So if you think about when you're socializing or when you're entering a conversation, you kind of wait for a break in the conversation to enter. But when it's really noisy, it's really hard to find those little breaks where you can come in and out of conversations at the appropriate time. And there have been studies looking at standardized tests of students in different classrooms with different noise levels. And they found that students that are in classrooms that are noisier, that have perhaps like an airport or a highway nearby, all of that noise, kind of that noise pollution into their classroom, they're really showing deficits in reading and math when their classroom is noisy. And throughout the day, if you think about listening all day long in a noisy environment, it makes you tired. So all of these students that are exposed to noise throughout the day are coming home really fatigued from listening and trying to understand in those noisy environments.
Yeah, and that's something especially great for our parents out there watching to know that, when the kids get home and think of all the layers, they have a whole day of listening and then they might have sports or other extracurricular activities, and then they're supposed to get home and, listen to mom and dad and get their homework done. So it definitely can be overstimulating. So I'm glad you mentioned. So I have one more question here for Mary, and then James, I want to bug you with some questions. So we'll get into that here shortly. But Mary, why should parents and viewers care about the noise?
Sure. Well, as a parent and as a society, we should care because we want our children to be successful learners.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of general education teachers are unaware of how classroom acoustics impact access to what they're teaching.
Yeah.
About 90% of teachers are unfamiliar with how classroom noise can limit access to their voice. And the more that we know about the acoustic environment in which our kids are learning and listening, the more we're able to support the teachers and make accommodations to their classrooms to help kids learn easier.
Mm-hmm. So James, are all classrooms created equally as far as acoustics go?
No, not really. Classrooms are different everywhere. Some classrooms are in school buildings that are 50 years old, and some classrooms got built, this summer and are seeing students for the first time, a week or two ago. And so the age of a classroom and the age of all of the mechanical systems that serve it can really greatly impact how the acoustics of these spaces are. Additionally, some classrooms may have been designed without acoustics in mind, maybe an older classroom, and if a classroom acoustics are considered by the design team, there's a lot of different criteria and design goals that go into making a functional, comfortable classroom for people to be in. And acoustics is only one of those things. So, to what end the acoustics get favored or prioritized amongst all of the many different design goals for a classroom can really change how that acoustic impact environment becomes when it finally gets used by teachers and learners.
Mm-hmm. This made me think of another question. I'm not sure if you'll know quite the answer, but for maybe some of our teachers watching who are teaching in those older classrooms, like you mentioned, is there anything that they can do themselves to kind of improve the classroom acoustic environment?
It Yes, and it
Mm-hmm.
kind of maybe depends on what the issue at hand is. As some of those older classrooms will I think some of the questions we have further on, we'll get into some of the different concerns or issues that we're trying to meet when we design a classroom. But for instance, say it's a overly reverberant space that is kind of echoey, or there's a lot of hard surfaces. One thing is adding more soft absorptive surfaces to the space can help a lot. Also, one other thing, it might be technique. So, in terms of if you're standing really far away from your listeners or teachers and things, there's a lot you have to talk louder, project your voice so it reaches everyone. But if you do more sort of get closer to the person listening, whether that's like a small group at a small table where you're talking, you can sort of reduce the overall noise that gets put into the space and can really sort of help some of those things. So those are sort of two different things that may help depending on what an issue might be with one of those older or maybe less acoustically focused classrooms, maybe.
Gotcha. I only asked because we do have Boys Town National training here on social media, and I plan to share this video with them. So if they were wondering, I thought that'd be a good one to throw in.
Sounds good.
So we have a few more questions here for our presenters. So if you're watching live and you have a question, now would be the time to drop it in the comments so we can make sure to get it answered in time. So the next question is, James, does the type of classrooms matter? So whether it's, an elementary classroom, dual classroom, a Montessori type style, how does that influence acoustics?
Yeah, absolutely. So the program or the function of a classroom will vary greatly over who's using it. If it's a bunch of elementary kids that need sort of that are going to be louder and have a lot of high energy, they're going to be moving to different spaces. You don't necessarily know where your sort of main talkers are going to be, but they really are going to be throughout everywhere in the space. That's really wants a different acoustic environment than say a more traditional pedagogy or more like older level pedagogy where you have a talker or a presenter at the front of a classroom speaking to maybe a larger group of people. The size of the classroom matters a whole heck of a lot. If you have a greater volume, a bigger space, it's going to get more reverberant just by being bigger and having more room for that noise or that sound to grow. So that's going to change a lot. Also, the program of the classroom changes a lot. Art and science classrooms may require a lot more need for durability and cleanable surfaces. So that those also correspond with surfaces that are also very reflective and can make the space more echoey. So that there's a lot of different nuance and needs that can go into different classrooms based on what it is being used for, that we really want to look at and see how we can make acoustics work for the specific needs of that classroom.
Great. So what are the standards for classroom design as they relate to the acoustics? Is it the ANSI standard?
ANSI, yeah. There's a standard. It's a joint standard by the American National Standards Institute, or ANSI. It's co-authored with the Acoustical Society of America, or ASA. It is last update, I believe, in 2010. And that is sort of our best practice for acoustic classroom, or for acoustics in classrooms that we have. And it sort of outlines three major proponents of acoustic design or control that we worry about. The first of which is how controlling how noise from outside of the classroom enters. So that's from, like Mary mentioned, your groundskeeping, your playgrounds, your things outside the building coming in. And then it also controls how well your sound can come in from some adjacent classrooms. Like the classroom next to you might be having a noisy event, like they might be doing, circle time with singing or something coming in, or as like your corridor, so your doors and your windows. All of those have to be designed to isolate a certain amount of noise so that the appropriate levels are coming in and not disturbing the function of what's going in. So that's the first item. The second item is controlling how well the sound acts once it's produced in the space. So this is sort of what we've been talking a little bit with reverberation or surface finishes in a space. If you give a really hard, echoey room, when you talk, all the signals that you have when you're talking is going to be heard multiple times, and it can interfere with some speech intelligibility. So instead of hearing sort of one coherent signal, you might be hearing 2 or 3 or 4 that start interfering with themselves, and it can make it hard to concentrate in an environment like that. And the third, we mentioned a couple of times too, is the background noise level due to sort of building systems. So your heating, your cooling, your air conditioning, you want to be in a comfortable environment, but all those things, moving a lot of air around can cause some noise, and you don't want that. If your baseline level of creating noise is too high, then you're going to have to talk louder to get over it, as Mary mentioned at the beginning. So that's another thing you want to control, to make sure that your baseline unoccupied noise level in the space is low enough that you can talk comfortably and have a good communication in there.
Yeah, that was a great explanation. Thanks. I know there's so many parts to explain, so that was good. So the next question is, why aren't all classrooms built to these standards, for optimal listening and learning?
Absolutely. So there's a few different reasons. The main one is that ANSI standards aren't an enforceable standard in most districts or building codes. So it's not, if you go to build a building, there's a lot of things that get said in building code for safety and different things. And in most districts in the country, acoustics isn't sort of enforceable metric that needs to be met. That isn't to say they're not being considered. They usually are. But it's not something that says if you meet this, you don't get like an occupational or a license to operate the building or something like that. So that's probably the main reason why these aren't all met everywhere, is because it's not required. The second reason is there are a lot of competing goals when you're designing a classroom. So say you are wanting to put in, different glass elements so that you can see through different things. That glass is really hard for reflections, and it also doesn't necessarily provide a lot of isolation between what noise can go through it, as well as maybe say a solid wall. So putting that in might be required for something else, but it competes sometimes with what the goal of the acoustics is. Also, some of these treatments, to get some of these low background noise levels, or these treatments, they may cost some money. But schools are often built with very strict budgeting and financing processes. And if acoustics haven't been considered from day one or from the beginning of a project, when someone does mention it or it gets thought about in the design, it may put the project over budget. So because it wasn't required and they maybe didn't consider everything all up front, how different things play, it may not get included to get everything exactly to that ANSI sort of like best practice design. So lastly, these design guidelines have been around 20 years. There's a lot of classrooms that were built before 20 years ago. So like that isn't to say acoustics weren't considered before then, but they may not have the guidance or the knowledge to go through that and, put all of those in place before then. So.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So obviously here at Boys Town National Research Hospital, hearing is one of our main focuses with our care, with our research. So Mary, how do classroom acoustics affect kids, with hearing loss versus those without?
Sure. Well, we already talked a little bit about some of the detrimental effects of noise and reverberation for students who have typical hearing. Um, so just keep that in mind that students with typical or normal hearing have difficulty hearing and remembering in noisy and reverberant environments. And students with hearing loss are at even more of a disadvantage because they have hearing loss. They have less access to what the teacher is saying due to their hearing loss. So even with the use of hearing devices like hearing aids or cochlear implants, it's very rare for a student to have 100% access to speech. And then you throw in noise and reverberation or distance where the teacher is speaking far away from the child. And that percentage of instruction that's accessible to the student decreases drastically. And it's a lot harder for those students to work and to stay engaged. And so students with hearing loss really require what's called a better signal to noise ratio, or having the teacher's voice even higher above that noise level than students with typical hearing would have. They have actually a separate recommendation within those ANSI standards to have a lower reverberation time so that they're able to listen and learn without all of those competing echoes. And so a lot of times teachers might see students acting inattentive or withdrawing socially or becoming isolated if they're unable to hear well in the classroom. And that often happens with students who are hard of hearing.
So, what are some ways that teachers can improve that listening environment for kids with hearing loss?
Yeah, so I think one of the first steps is to know what may be wrong or may be challenging aspect of your classroom design. If you don't know exactly what's going on, there could be a lot of different things competing for what would need to get done. So, trying to identify what the problem in the classroom is. So that could be, based on some of the things we mentioned, it might be that you have too much noise intrusion. So say you're getting too much background noise from like the outside or from your neighbor classroom or from the corridors, things. And then if that is an issue, that's probably one of the more robust issues to fix, because you need to sort of maybe go in and improve a wall or something of that nature. Also, if it's too echoey in the space, that's you need to add some absorbing sound materials to that space. That could be something maybe temporary, like maybe cushions or rugs or different things. It also may be something more permanent, like fixing a ceiling tile or adding some wall panels to the space to make it really get that reverberation time controlled and appropriate for learning and for learning with hearing loss. Or it could be something like a background noise from like the mechanical system. So the mechanical system maybe it's aged over time and some bearings got misaligned or they've aged, and if you rebalance the system, maybe that will help get our background noise level lower. But each one of those different concerns or issues has a little bit of different problems. So identifying what's going on is the first step. And there are some like smartphone apps that may help you determine like what your background noise level is and or like how reverberant the space is. But as always, I will recommend, maybe reach out to a local acoustician to come out and take a look at your space. Happy to help. We want all of these spaces to be, working and functioning well for everyone, and happy to sort of help provide some initial guidance or maybe a more professional capacity. So.
Yeah, great.
I would also say that an important tool that teachers can use are remote microphone systems. And so remote microphone systems kind of alleviate some of those problems that James was just talking about. A teacher will wear a microphone on a lanyard, and that microphone will actually transmit the teacher's voice directly to the child's ear level device, so their hearing aid or cochlear implant. And when that happens, it bypasses any intermediate acoustical problems that might be in the classroom, whether the teacher is talking from a distance, since it's transmitted right to the child's ear. It sounds like the teacher is speaking very close to them. So it removes some of that background noise that may occur, and it removes that negative effect of reverberation as well. So I would say that's a really important one that we need to be considering for anybody teaching in a classroom.
Yeah. Where do teachers get those?
Typically, you can consult with your educational audiologist within the school district.
Okay.
Oftentimes, hearing devices also could come with a small microphone. With it's not an educational remote microphone system, but it can also just be used for personal use. And so it doesn't have all the features of an educational system, but it gets the job done in terms of sending the teacher's voice directly to the child's device. So that would be found through the child's clinical audiologist.
Awesome. So my last question tying into this chat is, what resources does Boys Town National Research Hospital offer to help youth hear better in the classroom?
Sure. Well, I'd say if you are a parent or if you're a teacher or a service provider working with children in the classroom, and if you have questions or if you're unsure if a child or student in your classroom is able to hear well, or if you have concerns about them shutting down or becoming isolated or seeming confused when the room gets more and more active, I would refer for a hearing test.
Okay.
And typically those are they can be done through the school district, but also we have pediatric clinics here at Boys Town National Research Hospital. I think the most important thing is that you're able to see a pediatric audiologist who is well versed in diagnosing hearing disorders and fitting those hearing devices if needed. So hearing aids, cochlear implants, or remote microphone systems.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And I'll make sure to also link below this video how you can get access to those clinics that Mary just mentioned in case you want to schedule an appointment with an audiologist for your child or look into that further. So Mary and James, this has been such a helpful chat, and it's something that I don't think all of us really consider when during back to school season, kind of how classroom acoustics really, really do influence their kids' learning. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise on it.
You're very welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Awesome. And for those of you who are watching later on who maybe weren't able to catch this live, if you have a question for James or Meredith and would like to ask, go ahead and drop it in the comment section and we'll get notified. And I'm happy to pass your question along to them to get an answer coordinated directly. So thank you all so much for watching, and we'll catch you in our next live. Have a great day.